In the waning years of the Edo period, when the shogunate's grip still stretched across Japan's provinces, there lived a warlord known as Lord Itsukawa Renjiro. He ruled over the coastal domain of Aomine, a land where mist rolled over pine forests and discipline hung heavier than the sea air. To his retainers, he was a man of unmatched honor. To his enemies, he was death in silk robes. Renjiro had been born in the age of transition, when peace had settled like dust after centuries of warfare. The samurai still trained, still bowed, still died for duty, but their swords now served the pen and the rope more than the battlefield. Justice in Aomine was not won by blood spilled on the ground, but by obedience, enforced with rope and silence. The Lord's palace stood on a hill of black stone, overlooking a fishing town that fed his armies. Its walls were painted with dragons and waves, symbols of patience and wrath. The townsfolk whispered that his court was haunted by the spirits of those who had disappointed him. When the wind blew through the corridors, they swore it carried the faint sound of choking breath. Lord Renjiro was known for his absolute loyalty to the shogun. Betrayal, even in the smallest form, was an offense to heaven. Traitors in his domain met punishments no one dared speak of aloud. And yet, every year, one or two still dared to test his will. Spies who sold information to rival clans, soldiers who broke their oaths, or peasants who spread forbidden words. To Renjiro, a traitor was not merely a liar. He was a disease that threatened the soul of his domain. In his private writings, the Lord described them as worms beneath the skin of loyalty, and he saw himself as the surgeon, duty-bound to cut them out slowly so others might learn from their screams. He was no madman. He smiled often and spoke softly. He wrote haiku about cherry blossoms and rain. But beneath that calm, his sense of justice was sharpened like a blade. He believed that pain purified dishonor, that to betray was to unmake one's humanity, and only suffering could restore it. The Lord's samurai served him not only in war, but in judgment. They carried out his sentences in secret courtyards lit by paper lanterns, where shadows swayed like ghosts. Every execution was performed with precision, each knot tied with ceremonial care. The rope was both weapon and teacher. Among the people of Aomine, stories of Renjiro's punishments grew into legend. Mothers warned their sons not to speak against the shogun, for Lord Renjiro's ropes could reach from the palace to the marketplace. Travelers swore that at night, the air near the palace gate smelled faintly of blood and smoke. The Lord's authority stretched beyond fear. It became faith. His retainers believed that disloyalty invited divine retribution, and that Renjiro was the chosen hand of the gods to deliver it. Temples in the region began to carve ropes on their statues, symbols of obedience and the price of betrayal. Despite his harsh justice, Renjiro kept order. No rebellion rose in Aomine for decades. His subjects bowed deeply when his palanquin passed, never meeting his eyes. His rule was one of quiet terror, beautiful on the surface, cruel beneath. And though his punishments were rarely seen, the tales of their aftermath made sure none forgot. In his private garden, where koi swam beneath falling maple leaves, the Lord often meditated. He believed that death must come not as vengeance, but as lesson. He once said, "A sword kills swiftly, but the rope teaches." His closest samurai, Captain Hayato, never forgot those words. It was in the winter of 1817 that the first major betrayal struck his domain. A trusted samurai named Sadao, who had served in Renjiro's household for 10 years, was accused of selling military secrets to a rival lord. The information, maps of Aomine's defenses, had surfaced in Kyoto. Renjiro summoned his council in silence. He listened to every testimony with eyes that betrayed no emotion. When Sadao was brought before him, bound at the wrists, the hall was so quiet one could hear the distant sound of a gong. The accused bowed deeply, trembling. "Loyalty," Renjiro said softly, "is the thread that binds our souls to honor. When that thread breaks, what remains of the man?" Sadao tried to speak, but the Lord raised a hand. "Do not answer. The rope will speak for you." The punishment was not carried out that night. Renjiro was not impulsive. He believed in preparation, that the rope must be woven, the courtyard chosen, and the spirit of the condemned given time to reflect. Sadao was locked in a stone cell where incense burned and monks chanted sutras. He would live 3 more days. During those days, rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered that Lord Renjiro would perform the death of slow strangulation, a punishment reserved only for the highest of traitors. It was said the victim would die not in seconds, but in hours, as ropes cut into flesh, inch by inch, breath by breath. The Lord spent those 3 days in quiet prayer. To him, this was not an act of cruelty, but a duty to balance the moral order. He saw Sadao's death as a message, one that would echo through generations. He wrote in his journal, "Mercy breeds rebellion, pain breeds remembrance." When the 3rd day came, the moon was full over the palace. Lanterns were hung in the courtyard, their light trembling like candle flames on water. Lord Renjiro emerged in black robes embroidered with silver threads of rope. His retainers bowed as he passed, their faces hidden beneath shadow. The condemned was brought forth trembling, his eyes swollen with fear. Behind him, Captain Hayato carried a long coil of hemp, smooth, strong, glistening in the torchlight. The executioner's hands did not shake. He had done this before. Renjiro stepped closer to Sadao, his voice low. "May this rope cleanse your soul of falsehood. May it tighten around your dishonor until truth escapes your final breath." Then, he turned to his men and gave a single nod. The courtyard fell into silence. Only the sound of the wind moved through the bamboo trees as the first knot was tied. The punishment of ropes, the lesson of suffocation, was about to begin. But none spoke of what came after that night, for what Lord Renjiro did beneath the cold moon would be remembered only in whispers, and in the mark it left upon every soul who witnessed it. The courtyard of Aomine Castle lay bathed in moonlight, its gravel raked into perfect lines, as though the earth itself awaited judgment. Every breath of wind stirred the paper lanterns, casting trembling shadows on the walls. The assembled samurai stood in silence, faces hidden beneath their helmets. None dared meet the eyes of Lord Itsukawa Renjiro. Before them knelt the condemned, Sadao Takamura, once a loyal retainer, now stripped of rank and name. His kimono hung loose, his wrists bound behind his back. His lips quivered as the winter air burned his lungs. To betray his lord was to sever not only loyalty, but existence itself. Renjiro watched from his seat on a raised platform, expression carved in stone. To him, this was not murder, it was purification. The rope torture, known in his domain as Shimabari no Keimu, was a ritual of slow strangulation, meant to restore order through pain. Its victims were traitors, men who had betrayed the sacred code of Bushido. In the Edo era, traitor did not merely mean one who sold secrets to an enemy. It meant a man who defied his vow, who spoke against his master, who placed himself before his clan. Such men were called urajirimono, and to the samurai, their souls were polluted. The rope was their cleansing flame. Captain Hayato stepped forward carrying a wooden box. Inside lay coils of hempen rope, soaked in salt water until they were stiff and rough. The salt ensured the fibers would bite deep into flesh. The executioner bowed low before Lord Renjiro, then turned to his victim. He began by looping the first rope around Sadao's chest, just beneath the ribs, tightening it slowly. The fibers pressed into the man's skin, raising pale ridges that deepened into red. Sadao gasped, but did not scream. Samurai were taught to die with silence. But when the second rope encircled his shoulders and arms, the tremor in his jaw betrayed him. The executioner moved with the calm precision of a craftsman. Each knot had meaning. Each placement told a story. One rope crossed diagonally across the back, another wound around the neck but did not yet tighten. They were symbols of dishonor being bound, a visible map of guilt. Renjiro's voice broke the silence. Every knot binds your falsehood. Every pull draws you closer to truth. Sadao whimpered, his forehead pressed against the cold ground. My lord, mercy. The lord's gaze remained distant. Mercy is the privilege of the loyal. At his signal, 2 attendants stepped forward. They began to twist wooden rods into the loops of the rope, slowly turning them to tighten the coils. The cords dug deeper into flesh. Sadao's breath hitched, his veins standing out along his neck. With each turn, the ropes constricted, crushing muscle and forcing blood upward into his face. The sound was faint but haunting, a creak of hemp, the stifled grunt of a dying man, and the soft rhythm of the wind. His eyes bulged slightly. The skin beneath the cords turned purple, swelling until the flesh bulged grotesquely between the ropes. Still, Renjiro said nothing. His calm made the moment unbearable. To him, pain was a mirror in which a traitor saw his soul laid bare. The executioners stopped after the third turn. Sadao sagged forward, gasping for breath, his body trembling. The ropes had already begun to cut into his shoulders, leaving trails of blood. His chest heaved in shallow bursts. He could not move. Every muscle was pinned. Hayato bowed. "My lord, the first stage is complete." Renjiro rose, descending the steps of his platform. The courtyard grew colder with each step he took. He approached the bound man and looked down at him as though studying an artifact. "You once swore to die for me," he said softly. "Yet you sold our secrets to men who would burn our villages. You gave them the names of my guards. Did you think they would spare you?" Sadao tried to speak, but the ropes around his chest made words impossible. Only a strangled gasp escaped his lips. Renjiro knelt beside him, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Confession is the breath of the dying. Speak what truth remains." At last, with what little strength he had, Sadao choked out a name, a rival lord in Kyoto who had paid him in gold. His voice cracked, the sound barely human. But Renjiro's face showed no satisfaction, no fury, only solemn duty. "Truth," he murmured, "must be paid for in pain." The second stage began. The attendants moved behind Sadao, tightening the ropes around his arms until the skin broke and thin rivulets of blood ran down his sides. His fingers turned blue. Another twist of the rods constricted his chest, and his breathing became shallow, frantic. The neck rope, which had hung loosely until now, was drawn taut, slowly, deliberately. It pressed against his throat like a living serpent. His head jerked back, eyes rolling upward. His tongue pressed against his teeth as if seeking air that would not come. The courtyard filled with the quiet sound of death, a rasping wet gasp, rhythmic and steady. The crowd of samurai stood still, not out of cruelty, but reverence. This was their lord's justice. Minutes passed. Sadao's body convulsed, then fell still, hanging between life and death. The ropes held him upright, his weight suspended by his own suffering. Renjiro gestured for the tightening to stop. "He will not die quickly," he said. "Let him listen to the silence he has earned." They left him there, tied to the post, breathing raggedly beneath the cold moon. The Lord returned to his seat, eyes closed in meditation. Around him, no one spoke. The air felt thick with spirits, the ghosts of all who had met this fate before. Hours passed before dawn. By then, the birds had begun to sing faintly in the distance, and Sadao's voice had vanished. Only the sound of the rope creaking in the morning wind remained. When the sun finally rose, the Lord stood once more. He approached the lifeless figure, the ropes now soaked with sweat and blood. His hand brushed against the cord that had ended a man's dishonor. "Let this lesson bind the living," he said. "For loyalty, once loosened, can never be retied." The samurai bowed deeply, the lesson etched forever into their hearts. None would speak of that night again, but every soldier in Aomine knew betrayal was not a mistake. It was a slow death that began the moment one forgot whom they served. As servants removed the body, Lord Renjiro turned away, his face unreadable. In his private chamber that evening, he washed his hands in silence and wrote a final verse in his diary. "A rope does not hate. It only remembers the shape of the throat it held." The ceremony of strangulation had ended, but in the shadows of Aomine Castle, it had only just begun to change the fate of those who watched. 3 days passed after the execution of Sadao Takamura, yet the silence in Aomine Castle felt heavier than ever. The courtyard where he died reeked of hemp and ash, and even the wind avoided it. Servants whispered that they heard ropes creak in the night, as though Sadao's spirit still gasped for air. Lord Itsukawa Renjiro sat alone before a shrine, eyes fixed on the flickering flame of a single candle. Justice had been served, yet his mind found no rest. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Sadao's swollen face and heard the faint sound of tightening rope. For the first time, he wondered if the rope had also bound his soul. Captain Hayato, who had overseen the punishment, approached him in the garden at dawn. Mist hung over the pond as he bowed low. "My lord," he said softly, "the men are frightened. They claim to hear the dead man's cries. Even the villagers say your justice has turned to fear." Renjiro did not look up. "Fear keeps men loyal," he said coldly. "The rope teaches what mercy forgets." Hayato hesitated. "But even the strongest rope frays with time, my lord." Renjiro's gaze hardened. "Do you doubt me?" "I doubt only that cruelty can hold peace," Hayato replied. The lord turned away, silent. He remembered his father, poisoned by treacherous retainers when Renjiro was just 16. That night of betrayal had shaped him. Since then, he had believed only pain could preserve order, but now even he could feel the rope tightening around his own heart. That night, the guards swore they saw a shadow swaying in the courtyard. The ropes that had bound Sadao were still hanging from the post, but one had loosened itself. When they told Renjiro, he ordered the courtyard sealed. Still, the creaking sounds persisted. At dawn, a messenger arrived from Edo with a letter from the shogun, warning that fear had turned the people against him. Renjiro burned it without reading the end. "The shogun rules with ink," he muttered. "I rule with silence." Soon after, another man, a soldier accused of stealing rice, was brought before him. The ropes were prepared once more, the post cleaned. But as Renjiro looked at the trembling man, something inside him shifted. The memory of Sadao's final breaths returned, echoing like a curse. He raised his hand. "Stop!" Gasps filled the courtyard. "He will live," Renjiro said quietly. "Let him work until death takes him, but not by my command." From that day onward, the rope was never used again. Renjiro sealed the instruments of execution in a cedar chest and buried them beneath the plum trees. Still, on winter nights, the wind through those branches seemed to sigh like a dying man's breath. In his final years, Renjiro wrote one last verse. "The rope that binds justice also binds the soul. To rule in silence is easy, to forgive, harder still." And thus ended the reign of the Rope Lord of Aomine. Subscribe the channel for more interesting content.